Welcome to our briefing on Chinese theater and particularly on Chinese opera, which is sometimes going to be referred to as theater of the capital, Peking opera, or Beijing opera. And Peking opera, now the preferred nomenclature would be Beijing opera, although often it's referred to as Peking opera. I'm going to move pretty quickly through this material because most of it's covered in the reading and then also re-emphasized by many of the videos that you're going to see, but I'd like to cover some of these points and highlight some of these things individually. So, early Chinese theater, a lot of the drama, as was the case with Indian drama, and I think we'll see this as the case with Japanese drama as well, animal movements form an integral part of many of the martial art, dance, and theater traditions that we see in early Chinese theater. Early martial arts systems form the basis from which the tradition of Chinese martial art operas and their acrobatic fighting scenes, as well as the 20th century and 21st century Gong Fu or Kung Fu movies later developed. Now, it was customary at the court and at public festivals to organize grand-scale festivals called Pai Shi, or 100 entertainments, or 100 games circuses, and Chinese circus ultimately evolved from these forms. These are predecessors of later opera scenes in which female characters elegantly operate their long white silk sleeves, as so-called water sleeves, which are one of the supporting elements we're going to talk about later, go along with the core acting and singing that you will see in Beijing opera. During the Tang Dynasty, Beijing was the world's biggest metropolis. Okay, I'm going to switch over to this page here. It's a vast network of caravan routes. It's the terminus of something called the Silk Road, which we talked about before, which connected Shangang with Central Asia, India, Persia, and finally with the Mediterranean world. And this brought a lot of cultures from all over Central Asia and even the Mediterranean part of Asia, or what we call Asia Minor, to China. And it brought a lot of stories with it, and stories included, among others, early play scripts such as Mask and Dancing and The Singing Wives. Now, this culminated in the dynasties in something we call court theater or court performances, and the spectacles, even in the 7th century BCE, could reach sort of megalomaniac proportions, performances that welcomed as many as 30,000 spectators. And a new form of entertainment gained popularity. It was a so-called Sanchu Si, or adjutant play, and it consisted of short comic skits, featured 2 comic characters and more or less a mute courtier called a San Chun, and a slightly clever character called a Sang Ku. And this was something that we see echoed even in Greek theater, as more influence comes from the outside, as we have more visiting emissaries from the outside world. The more tribal, the more ritualistic dramas tend to take shape into easier, more accessible shows that can be seen by people that don't necessarily speak the language. And often comedy is something that becomes a big part of that. These outside influences also took the form of Buddhist manuscripts that were brought to China, and the classic The Monkey King, which is one of the really canonized Chinese opera pieces, actually finds its origins in Indian literature. And there's definitely the influence of Indian drama. Even the Ramayana can be traced through this, okay? And the Monkey King has its origins to some extent in the Ramayana. Um, so there was a fusion of singing and lyrics and prose that all came together, and we're seeing the beginnings, the very, very beginnings of this form uh, um, of a drama that has musical elements, that has singing, that has dancing. And in a way, it's sort of echoes the American musical theater. In a sense, it's got a real root in cultural traditions, but it's something that's very accessible to people regardless of their backgrounds. Um, so as this began to become more and more of a part of the Chinese cultural landscape, the state officials wanted to sort of nail down the tradition and get a sense of how people would perform this and organize this. And so there were organized the Pierre Garden School, which was the first real attempt at a theater school, okay, to train musicians and dancers and actors. And the founder of that, Ming Huang, uh, later founded what we call the Third School, which was really dedicated to uh, training performers in this new form of drama. We're going to sort of skip ahead because some of this is covered, like I said, in some of the reading as well as the videos, and we're going to move on. We have talked about the Qing Dynasty, and we're going to move on and talk a little bit more in depth about uh, capital drama, capital opera, and Peking opera, and the plays, etc. So, uh, the written play in Peking opera is really sort of a working script. It's kind of a basis for creating the drama. Basic plots, which have been abstracted from different sources. Um, the older Kanggu plays date back to the Ming Dynasty, although, as I said, really um, Peking opera began to really take shape, and its fusion form really came together under the Qing, spelled Qing, dynasty. So Kangju is still, or Kangchu is still the oldest form of Chinese opera being performed today. And this was particularly a favorite of the greatest Beijing Peking opera performer Mai Ling Fang, who we're going to look at in somewhat more depth later. Okay, it's from popular stories, romances. Again, the Manchu rulers wanted to grab those big stories and mythologies that were a part of the plains culture and use that as a unifying form to get people excited about their culture. The dialects that were performed in Peking was particularly usually performed in Mandarin, although it contains elements of other uh, dialects as well. So some of the themes from the storytellers, we have different sort of breakdown of how these plays, they tend to fall into categories: civilian plays, martial plays, and those can even be further divided into singing plays, recitation plays, and plot plays, and fighting plays. And as you read through this, you're going to get a little bit more detail on that. Um, there's several kinds of stages. Uh, the regional uh, operas really began being performed in simple tea houses or temporary stage structures, or put together in marketplaces or at county fairs. The court theaters were somewhat more elaborate, again, though, really beginning from this tea house structure and elaborating it and aggrandizing it. Private chamber theaters were sort of the smaller, more exclusive version of this. And now, as we headed into the 20th century, we get a much sort of grander version of this, able to accommodate much larger audiences. However, through all of this, the stages tend to have some basic elements. They are traditionally a raised platform which extends forward, three sides facing the audience. Behind the stage hangs a back curtain with two curtain doors leading backstage. The left door used for entering and the right door for exit. And when making their entrances and exits, characters usually introduce themselves by hinting at some of their main characteristics, such as, they'll come on and say, I'm a selfish scholar called so-and-so, or I'm a poor orphan girl called so-and-so, or I am the very handsome Monkey King, as is in the case of the opera The Monkey King. Sometimes those back curtains will be quite elaborate, with visual painting elements such as stylized clouds or mountains, for example, or a city gate painted on cloth or cardboard. And sometimes those scenic elements are also carried on, as we saw with the curtain in Kutyatam. There's a sort of similar fluidity of the scenery that can move on and off, being carried on by actual performers. Generally speaking, though, all that's really needed for Peking opera is a stage, a table, and a couple of chairs. It can become as simple as that. And in that way, it's not dissimilar to Shakespearean theater, which has a permanent architectural theater space, and individual plays can be articulated as simply as just having a particular table, a change of costumes, and different prop elements as well. Now, the acting skills are very intricate. Hand, eye, body, and feet techniques are very specific. Mime, dancing, acrobatics, singing, and recitation skills are extremely important. Non-naturalistic, symbolic acting style, that's what we're seeing characterized in the Chinese theater. Many things can be told or illustrated by what we call supporting skills or supporting techniques. Now, these are things that are as varied as the silken extensions of sleeves, or so-called water sleeves, handling of a fan, and that there are literally dozens of ways in which a particular character will handle a fan. Ma Ling Fang particularly was expert at using the fan to tell the story. The way a beard is manipulated, the manipulation of hair or a handkerchief, these are all supporting techniques that help tell the story through physicalization. The roles represented abstractions of human attributes. Actors really do not aim to create psychological portrayals of certain individuals. Now, inherited, there are four main role categories. These are inherited from Kanggu, the old traditional form, and those forms include Sheng, or the male role, Dan, or the female role, Jing, or the painted face role, and Chao, the comic roles. And now I'm going to pause, and we're going to go on to the second segment, and we'll talk about where this incredible style of theater took Chinese culture in terms of the world stage.